My name is Margaret Chin. I'm 54 years old. For 23 years, my parents introduced me to people as the one who never figured it out. I didn't go to law school like my sister. I didn't marry a doctor like my brother. I didn't have the right job, the right degree, the right life. I worked in property management, which my mother described at family dinners as glorified cleaning. My father once told his golf buddies I was still trying to find myself at 40. They stopped inviting me to holidays in 2014 because my presence was awkward next to my successful siblings. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just quietly bought buildings. Small ones at first, then bigger ones, then entire blocks. Last month, my parents needed a place to live. Their retirement savings had run out. They found a beautiful rent-controlled apartment in a renovated historic building in downtown Portland. They signed a 12-month lease. They moved in on a Tuesday. On Friday, they received the welcome packet. Inside was a letter with my company's name at the top and my name listed as owner. They called me that night. But before I tell you what I said, let me take you back to the dinner where my father toasted my siblings and called me the one who never made it. Welcome back to calm drama stories, where silence builds empires and the last laugh is always the loudest. If you're new here, this is about the daughter they called a failure who became their landlord. Stick around, hit subscribe, let's get into it. I grew up in Beaverton, Oregon, quiet suburb outside Portland, the kind of place where people put up Christmas lights the day after Thanksgiving, and everyone knew which house gave out full-size candy bars on Halloween. My father, Daniel Chen, was a civil engineer for the city of Portland, 43 years designing bridges and water systems. My mother, Helen, taught high school chemistry at Sunset High School. She had a reputation for being tough but fair, the kind of teacher students complained about during the semester and thanked in their graduation speeches. They were immigrants from Taiwan, came to the United States in 1968 with 2 suitcases, $300, and a plan. Work hard, save money, give their children opportunities they never had. They believed in education, achievement, and visible success. Degrees from prestigious schools, high-paying jobs, status. There were 3 of us kids. Victoria, born 1968. Michael, born 1970. Me, Margaret, born 1971. I was 15 months younger than Michael, the surprise baby. The one my mother described to her friends as unplanned but loved. Victoria was the perfect daughter. National Merit Scholar, full scholarship to Stanford, undergraduate degree in economics. Law degree from UC Berkeley, graduated top 10% of her class. She joined Morrison & Foerster in San Francisco at 26, made partner at 38. She married another lawyer named James Whitfield, who specialized in intellectual property litigation. They had 2 children, a house in Pacific Heights worth $3.2 million, and a vacation home in Napa they visited 3 weekends a year. Michael was the golden son. Summa cum laude from MIT, mechanical engineering. MBA from Wharton. He worked for McKinsey & Company for 6 years, then jumped to a tech startup as VP of operations. The company went public in 2011. Michael's stock options made him a paper millionaire at 41. He married a pediatric surgeon named Amanda Park. They lived in a house in Madison Park, Seattle, worth $2.3 million. They drove matching white Teslas. And then there was me. I went to Portland State University. Not Stanford, not MIT. Portland State. I got a bachelor's degree in business administration. No honors, no distinctions. Just a degree. I graduated in May 1993 with a 3.2 GPA, $18,000 in student loans, and a job offer from a property management company called Westside Rentals. Starting salary, $32,000 a year. My job was to manage residential buildings in Southeast Portland, collect rent, coordinate repairs, handle tenant complaints, deal with plumbing emergencies and noise disputes and lease violations. My mother cried when I told her, not happy tears, disappointed ones. She was sitting at the kitchen table in our house on Westview Drive. It was a Saturday morning in June. I'd just come back from signing my offer letter. She said, "Property management, that's what you're doing with your degree?" I said, "It's a good company, Mom, good benefits." She said, "Victoria's going to law school. Michael just got into MIT, and you're going to collect rent?" My father was reading the newspaper at the other end of the table. He didn't look up. He just said, "Not everyone's cut out for graduate school." I didn't argue. I started the job in July. I worked at Westside Rentals for 6 years. I managed apartment buildings. I learned how buildings worked, how old galvanized pipes corroded and needed replacing, how flat roofs leaked at the seams, how furnaces died in January when it was hardest to get a technician. I learned how to read leases, how to screen tenants, how to calculate net operating income and cap rates. I learned what made a property valuable and what made it a liability. I also learned that most landlords were either absentee owners who didn't care or overly involved micromanagers who made tenants miserable. There was a gap in the middle. A way to run buildings that was professional, responsive, and still profitable. In 1999, I bought my first property, a 4-unit apartment building on Southeast Belmont Street. The building was 47 years old, wood frame construction, peeling exterior paint, and a roof that leaked in 3 places. The owner was a 72-year-old man named Frank Kowalski, who'd inherited it from his father and was tired of dealing with it. He was selling for $180,000. I offered $175,000. He accepted. I put down $15,000, money I'd saved over 6 years of working, and got a loan from Cascade Community Bank. The loan officer's name was Rita Mendez. She was 53, skeptical, and made me walk her through a 12-page renovation plan and a 3-year financial projection before she'd approve the loan. She approved it. I closed on the building in November 1999. I renovated it myself, nights and weekends. I tore out stained carpet and replaced it with laminate flooring I bought on clearance from Home Depot. I repainted every wall. I patched the roof. I updated the kitchens with IKEA cabinets and appliances I found on sale at Sears. I did most of the work alone. Sometimes a friend helped. Sometimes I hired a handyman for things I couldn't do myself. Electrical, major plumbing. I rented all 4 units by March 2000. 1-bedroom apartments, $850 a month each. After mortgage, property taxes, insurance, and a reserve fund for repairs, I was clearing $1,200 a month. My parents didn't know, I didn't tell them. At family dinners, my mother would ask what I was up to. I'd say, same job, managing properties. She'd nod and change the subject to Victoria's latest case or Michael's promotion. My father would say, still at that rental place? I'd say yes. He'd say, well, steady work is good work. It was a dismissal disguised as encouragement. I nodded, I smiled, I didn't correct them. In 2001, I bought my second building, 6 units, Southeast Division Street. In 2003, I bought my third, 8 units, Northeast Alberta. In 2005, I bought 3 more buildings in 1 year. By 2008, I owned 12 properties, 118 residential units total across Portland. I'd quit Westside Rentals in 2005 to manage my own portfolio full-time. I formed an LLC, Margaret Chen Properties. I hired a part-time bookkeeper and a maintenance contractor. I refinanced my original loans as the buildings appreciated, pulling out equity to buy more properties. My parents still thought I worked for someone else. They thought I was still collecting rent for Westside Rentals. They never asked for details. I never offered them. At family gatherings, Victoria talked about her cases. Michael talked about his startup. I sat at the table and ate and said nothing. My mother would occasionally turn to me and say, "Margaret, you're so quiet. What's new with you?" I'd say, "Not much. Work's busy." She'd say, "Still doing property management?" I'd say, "Yes." She'd nod and turn back to Victoria. In 2012, I bought my first commercial property, a mixed-use building in the Pearl District, retail on the ground floor, 12 apartments above. The building was listed for $2.1 million. I offered $1.9 million. The seller accepted. I financed it with cash flow from my other properties and a commercial loan. I renovated the retail spaces and leased them to a coffee shop, a yoga studio, and a design boutique. I updated the apartments and raised the rents to market rate. The building generated $32,000 a month in gross rent. After expenses, it cleared $14,000. I was 39 years old. I owned 13 buildings. I was worth, on paper, about $8 million. I drove a 2004 Honda Accord. I lived in a 2-bedroom condo I'd bought in the Pearl in 2009. I wore jeans and sweaters from Target. I didn't look successful because I didn't care about looking successful. I cared about cash flow and equity and buildings that appreciated. My parents had no idea. Before I go further, let me ask you something. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you most? Have you ever built something in silence because you knew they wouldn't understand? If that's you, drop a comment. You're not alone. The dinner happened on November 8, 2014, my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. Victoria organized it. She rented a private room at Higgins Restaurant in downtown Portland. White tablecloths, prix-fixe menu, 17 people. Immediate family, my parents' closest friends, a few cousins from California. I almost didn't go. I'd been pulling away from family events for years. I'd show up for major holidays, stay 90 minutes, leave before dessert. But this was their 50th. I felt obligated. I arrived at 6:40 p.m., 20 minutes late. Everyone was already seated. The room smelled like roasted meat and red wine. Victoria sat at the head of the table next to my parents. Michael sat across from her with Amanda. I took the only empty seat at the far end of the table, next to a cousin I'd met twice. The evening went exactly as I expected. Victoria talked about a merger she'd just negotiated for a client. $1.8 billion, she said. the largest deal her firm had closed that year. Michael talked about his startup's IPO and the stock options that had vested, making him what he called comfortable. My parents beamed. Their friends congratulated them. "You must be so proud," someone said. My mother said, "We're very blessed. Our children have worked so hard." My father raised his glass. "To Victoria and Michael," he said. "The kids who made it." Everyone drank. Then someone, a woman named Grace Liu, one of my mother's longtime friends, turned to me and said, "And Margaret, what have you been up to? Are you still with that property company?" The table went quiet. I could feel everyone's attention shift to the far end where I sat. I said, "I manage properties, yes." Grace smiled, polite, curious. She said, "For the same company you've been with?" Before I could answer, my father said, "No, she works for herself now, collects rent from tenants, fixes leaky faucets." He laughed. Not cruelly, just casually. The way you laugh at a harmless family joke. Michael laughed too. He said, "Hey, someone's got to do it, right?" Victoria didn't laugh, but she didn't say anything either. She just looked at her plate. My mother reached over and patted my hand. She said, "Margaret's always been more hands-on, more practical. Not everyone's meant for corporate careers or professional degrees. Someone has to do the regular work." Grace looked uncomfortable. She said, "Well, property management is important." My father said, "Sure it is, but let's be honest. It's not Stanford Law. It's not an MIT degree." He raised his glass again. He said, "Here's to my children, to Victoria and Michael, who made their mother and me proud. And to Margaret, who's still figuring things out." People laughed, nervous laughter, uncomfortable laughter. I lifted my glass. I took a sip. I set it down. I didn't say anything. I sat through the rest of dinner. I sat through dessert. I sat through the toasts where Victoria talked about our parents' sacrifices and Michael talked about their unconditional support. At 9:15 p.m., I excused myself. I said I had an early morning. I hugged my mother. I shook my father's hand. I walked out of Higgins Restaurant and drove to my condo in the Pearl District, a 2-bedroom unit I owned in the building I'd purchased 2 years earlier. I sat in my living room with the lights off and looked out at the city. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I just felt done. I didn't go to Thanksgiving that year, or Christmas, or Easter. My mother called in January 2015. She said, "Margaret, you've missed 3 holidays. Is something wrong?" I said, "I'm busy." She said, "Busy with what?" I said, "Work." She said, "Margaret, you're 43 years old. Don't you think it's time to think about doing something more with your life? Something with a future?" I said, "I'm happy, Mom." She sighed. The sigh said everything. She said, "Happiness isn't the same as success, sweetheart." I said, "I have to go." We hung up. I didn't call her back. She didn't call me. Over the next 9 years, I saw my family maybe 10 times. A cousin's wedding in 2016, a funeral in 2018, Michael's 50th birthday party in Seattle in 2020, my father's 80th birthday in 2023. I'd show up. I'd stay an hour. I'd leave. They never asked about my life. I never volunteered. What they didn't know: by 2016, I owned 21 buildings. By 2019, I owned 30. By 2023, I owned 34 properties, including office buildings, retail centers, and an 8-story historic building called The Harris that I'd bought in 2019 for $6.2 million and spent $3.1 million renovating. My portfolio was worth $89 million. I employed 43 people: property managers, maintenance staff, accountants, leasing agents. I still drove the same Honda Accord. I still lived in the same condo. I still wore jeans and sweaters from Target. I didn't look wealthy because wealth, to me, wasn't about appearance. It was about freedom, options, security. My parents thought I was barely scraping by. My siblings thought I was stuck in a dead-end job. None of them asked, so I never told them. Then, in the summer of 2024, everything changed. My father had retired in 2015 at age 72. He and my mother had been living on his pension from the city, Social Security, and savings they'd accumulated over 50 years. They'd assumed it would be enough. It wasn't. My father had made poor investment decisions. Too conservative, too late. Their savings had been eroded by medical expenses. My mother's hip replacement in 2019. My father's heart surgery in 2021. And inflation. In 2019, they'd taken out a reverse mortgage on their house in Beaverton to pay off credit card debt. Michael had advised them to do it. He said it was smart financial planning. It wasn't. In July 2024, the reverse mortgage came due. The lender demanded payment in full, $340,000. My parents couldn't pay. They couldn't refinance. The bank foreclosed. They had 90 days to vacate. Victoria couldn't take them in. Her house in San Francisco was full. Both her adult children had moved home during the pandemic and stayed. There was no room. Michael wouldn't take them in. He told them his house in Seattle wasn't set up for elderly occupants and suggested they look into senior living facilities. He sent them a list of options. All of them cost $4,000 a month or more. My parents, at 81 and 79, needed an affordable apartment in Portland. My mother called me in early September. It was the first time we'd spoken in 18 months. She said, "Margaret, we're moving. We lost the house. We're looking for an apartment. Do you know of anything available?" I said, "What's your budget?" She said, "We can afford about $1,200 a month. Maybe $1,300 if we're careful." I said, "I'll see what I can find." I didn't tell her I owned half the rent-controlled buildings in the city. 2 weeks later, they found a listing online. 1-bedroom apartment in a renovated historic building in downtown Portland. The Harris on Southwest 10th Avenue. Hardwood floors, updated kitchen, elevator access, on-site laundry. Rent, $1,250 a month, utilities included. They applied through the online portal. Their application was approved within 48 hours. They signed the lease on October 15th, 2024. They moved in on October 22nd, a Tuesday. On Friday, October 25th, they received the standard welcome packet. Every new tenant gets one. Inside, apartment keys, parking pass, trash and recycling schedule, building rules, emergency contact numbers, and a welcome letter from the landlord, printed on cream-colored stationery. Company letterhead at the top, Margaret Chen Properties, LLC. Below that, in bold print, owner and principal, Margaret Y. Chen. If you're still here, you know what's about to happen. And if you think I should have told them, ask yourself this: would you? Hit subscribe, because the people who underestimate you never see it coming. My mother called me at 7:18 p.m. that Friday. I was sitting at my desk in my home office, reviewing lease agreements for a 12-unit building I'd just purchased in Northeast Portland. My phone buzzed. I saw her name. I almost didn't answer, but I did. I said, "Hello?" She said, "Margaret, we need to talk to you." I said, "About what?" She said, "We just moved into our new apartment, the one downtown." I said, "I know. You told me you were looking." She said, "The landlord's name is on the welcome letter." I didn't say anything. She said, "It says Margaret Y. Chen, Margaret Chen Properties. Is that you?" I said, "Yes." Silence. Long silence. I could hear her breathing. Then my father's voice. He'd taken the phone. He said, "You own this building?" I said, "Yes." He said, "How many buildings do you own?" I said, 34. More silence. He said, 34 buildings. I said, "Yes." He said, "Since when?" I said, "I bought my first one in 1999. I bought the Harris, the building you're living in 2019. I renovated it in 2020 and 2021. It reopened as rent-controlled housing in 2022. My mother's voice in the background, muffled but audible. How does she own buildings? She manages apartments for someone else. I said, "I own the buildings I manage. I've owned my own company since 2005. I have 43 employees." My father said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I said, "You never asked." He said, "We're your parents." I said, "You told a room full of people I was still figuring things out. You toasted Victoria and Michael for making you proud. You told your friends I collected rent and fixed toilets. So no, I didn't think you'd be interested in hearing about my business." My mother took the phone back. Her voice was shaking. She said, "Margaret, we didn't know. We didn't understand." I said, "I know. That's the point. You didn't care enough to ask." She said, "Are you going to evict us?" I said, "No. Your lease is valid. You applied like every other tenant. You were approved based on your income and credit. You're paying market rate for a rent-controlled unit. As long as you pay your rent on time and follow the building rules, you can stay as long as you want." My father said something in the background. I couldn't hear it. My mother said, "Your father wants to know if we can meet, to talk, in person." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because you're our daughter." I said, "I'm your landlord. If you have maintenance issues, submit a request through the tenant portal. If you have questions about your lease, email the property management office. That's not me. I don't handle day-to-day operations." She said, Margaret, please. I said, your rent is due on the 1st of every month. There's a 5-day grace period. After that, late fees apply. The amount is specified in your lease. Have a good evening. I hung up. I set the phone down on my desk. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I felt calm, clear. I'd spent 23 years being invisible to them. Now they'd spend however long they lived in that apartment, seeing my name on every rent payment, every maintenance notice, every official building communication. My name at the top, their names at the bottom. That was enough. My parents tried to visit me 3 times in the weeks that followed. I declined each time. I was busy, I said. I had meetings, I had site visits, I had closings. All of it was true. Victoria called me in early November. She said, Mom told me about the building, about everything. I said, okay. She said, I didn't know, Margaret. I'm sorry. I said, for what? She said, for not asking, for assuming, for letting them make you feel small. I said, it's fine. She said, is it? I said, I stopped needing anyone's approval in 1999. I'm fine. She said, I'd like to see you. Maybe get coffee? I said, I'm pretty busy, Victoria. She said, I understand. We haven't spoken since. Michael hasn't called. I don't expect him to. My parents still live in the Harris, apartment 4B. They're good tenants. They pay their rent on time. I get the automated payment confirmation on the 1st of every month. They don't cause problems. They follow the rules. We don't speak. I see my mother sometimes in the lobby when I'm meeting with the building manager. She'll smile. I'll nod. We don't stop to talk. My father tried once. It was mid-December. I was in the parking garage inspecting a water leak the maintenance team had reported. He walked up to me and said, Margaret, please, can we talk about this? I said, there's nothing to talk about. Your rent is current. Your apartment is in good condition. Is there a maintenance issue I should know about? He said, that's not what I mean. I said, then there's nothing to discuss. You wanted successful children. You have 2, Victoria and Michael. I'm just the person who owns your building. He said, that's not fair. I said, neither was that toast. I walked away. He didn't follow. The building they live in, the Harris, is on the National Register of Historic Places. Built in 1924, 8 stories, brick and terracotta facade. I bought it for $6.2 million when it was vacant and crumbling. I spent $3.1 million renovating it. New electrical, new plumbing, seismic retrofitting, restored original details. I converted it to rent-controlled housing with a mix of studios, 1-bedrooms and 2-bedrooms. It's worth $14 million now. It houses 112 tenants. 2 of them are my parents. Their lease has their names printed at the bottom. Daniel Chen, Helen Chen. My name is at the top. I'm 54 years old. I own $89 million in real estate. I live in the same 2-bedroom condo I bought in 2009. I drive a 2015 Honda Accord now. I finally replaced the old one last year. I wear jeans and fleece jackets. I don't wear jewelry. I don't carry designer bags. I look like someone who manages buildings. Which I do. I just happen to own them. Last week, I closed on another property, a 10-unit building in the Hawthorne district. Purchase price, $2.4 million. I paid cash. I celebrated by taking myself to dinner at a restaurant I like in the Pearl district. I ordered the steak. I drank a glass of wine that cost $18. I sat alone at a table by the window and watched people walk by on the sidewalk. I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. Success isn't about proving yourself to people who never believed in you. It's about building something so solid that their opinion becomes irrelevant. My parents thought I was a failure. They were wrong. They just didn't know it until they needed a place to live. Now they know. Every month when they write that check, or more accurately, when the automated payment processes from their bank account to my property management company, they know. I don't need them to apologize. I don't need them to acknowledge what they did. I don't need reconciliation. I just needed my name at the top of the lease. And I got it. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to see you, you already know what this feels like. And you know it's not about revenge. It's about validation. The kind you give yourself. Drop a comment. Tell me your story. I read every one. Thank you for staying with me through this one. If this reminded you that the quiet ones are usually the ones building empires, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Check the description for the next story about the family that pushed her out and the inheritance they thought they'd get. Hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.